Hello, welcome back to another pen talk. Thanks for tuning in. Thanks for joining me on my pen journey. And we're on the fourth of the four vintage pens that a local pen person asked me to restore for them. This one was the biggest challenge. I soaked the end of the barrel in a combination of soapy water and regular water for a week. And just yesterday, it was still a lot of ink was coming out. I was able to pull out the nib and feed, so that allowed more water to get inside. And eventually, using section pliers, which I don't like to use, but you just have to be careful with how much pressure you apply, this section finally popped out. And there was a incredibly petrified sack inside there. It looks like at one time, because this is a button filler, that because that sack had hardened, they actually bent this trying to get the sack to work. But thankfully, we're now ready to restore it. And as I mentioned before in some of my restoration videos, I'm just going to go over the highlights of this pen. I'm going to clean it all up, put everything as good a working order as I can, reassemble it, and see how well it writes. That is one pretty good size nib. I think the pen's in very good condition. A little bit of discoloration to the celluloid, but not unexpected for these Duofolds from this time frame. So I removed the end of that sack that was on here, and it's nice to see that has threads on it, that it's going to make the sack when I put a new sack on here. But it definitely appears like they used some type of glue, maybe a shellac when this was assembled, which I will not use. And that made this hard to take apart. As you can see, someone else has tried to take it off and was unsuccessful, but soaking it for a while, which has worked for most pens, and making certain I limit the amount of pressure that I use to remove it. If that wouldn't have worked, my next step would have been to run some hot water over the end of the barrel, just to kind of expand the barrel and hopefully break this free, but thankfully I didn't have to do that. So these are section pliers, which you can get at any of the pen repair places, Anderson's, Pendemonium, probably a lot of other ones. It says nice rubber jaws, which grip around the section. Now you can exert a lot of torque with these and a lot of pressure, so that's where you got to be careful if you do get these and use them. I just gently work a section out with these. I was at a pen show one time at one of the premier pen restorers, and I brought a pen that I couldn't get the section out. He worked on it, he couldn't get it out. He eventually took pliers and he broke the pen. And it was not a common cheap pen, it was an inexpensive rare pen. So trust me, you need to use these with caution. So this is what a pressure bar looks like in most Duofolds. Some of them are slightly different designs. This one was in decent shape, but I still use a polishing of these bars to make certain I remove as much corrosion as possible. And then I wax everything for a couple of reasons. One, to protect them against future corrosion, and number two, to make the sack slide in easier, which this one feels as like it's in good shape. This Duofold has a feature in it I've never seen before. Inside that barrel is a metal ring which catches that pressure bar. So when you press down on the button, you can see how that pressure bar would press against the sack. The pressure bar doesn't lay flat, so I'm going to do a little bit more work on it and adjust it. But that's a nice feature, because normally that end of that pressure bar sits up against the end of the section, and this makes it independent of the section. So we're ready for final assembly. This is the largest sack I'm comfortable putting in there because you need a lot of space between the sack and the pressure bar, the way that it works. I've shellacked the end. I've also sanded down the part of the section that fits into the barrel so it will fit nice without being overly tight. I'm not going to put the nib in and feed in until after I assemble it. We'll show you that when I get to it, but this is a big nib. Here it is compared to a number 6 Knox, and it's substantially bigger length, width, the whole bit. Nice fine point on it where the Knox has a broad point. So I've talced the sack, made certain that it will slide in, and I've positioned that pressure bar so it catches inside that metal ring. So we're just going to slowly insert it so it goes in above the pressure bar, and that talc and that waxing of the pressure bar makes it slide in fairly easily. And I use this wooden dowel to make certain that the sack stays nice and straight as it goes in. That section fits tight, but that means it'll stay in place. So there we are. We're ready to ink it up, and the button seems to work fairly well. Parker made an incredible variety of Duofold pens. The first Duofold came out in around 1921, and that was, most people recognize, as a big red. It didn't have a cap band in the beginning. On the far left is the one I just recently restored, and I have a few other ivory ones in my collection. As you can see, the celluloid has aged differently in all of these pens, and also indicates and shows a lot of the variety that Parker put into their Duofolds. This has the square top, so this is the oldest one. It has 2 bands. The old ones would have 1 band. This was the predecessor to the Duofold called the Jackknife. Lucky Curve. And this pen was very popular, but then the Big Red came out, which was a much larger size and became even more popular. The square ends turned into a streamlined end in 1929 because Schaefer came out with their Balance. And I guess Parker needed to make a change to their design and make it a little bit more streamlined. I wouldn't say it was a significant change. These two here, which is a nice set, pen and pencil set, look to be about as clean color as possible. So that's kind of like my prize selection of this group. Here's an example of the telephone pencil. For those of you that may even remember rotary telephones, but this you'd stick into the rotary dial. And this is an example of a ladies' version with just a ring at the top. Parker made an incredible variety of these pens. So I just wanted to show 2 examples here of the great blue lapis color. And this one has the very wide band, which they made occasionally, and this shows that single band, which was in their earlier versions. And if we can get a imprint on here, which I think is going to be somewhat of a challenge, it still says Duofold and not Duofold Junior, so I would probably date this one at 1925, 26. I don't remember when the blue lapis color came out, but just to show you some examples of the amazing range that this model went through. And we would be remiss if we didn't show one of the Big Reds. And just to put it in perspective, yes, the Big Red was a big pen in its day. So you may ask, what else did the Parker Duofold evolve into? Well, here's our 2 excellent examples of a different version of a Duofold. They used the name quite a bit. It was still used in the 50s for different pens. And obviously the model was resurrected in late '88 to celebrate one of Parker's anniversaries. But these are 2 excellent examples of how they took that design and evolved it. This one is a vacuum filler and this one is a button filler. we've come to the important part of the video, is how does it write? Before we go into that, one of the things that I find interesting is the number of people that post some vintage pen that they may have found at a flea market or garage sale, or they say, or may have been part of their family collection, and the only question they ask is what is it worth? And that's a valid question to ask. Maybe if you wanted to insure it, if you wanted to sell it, that's a different matter. Because to me, what is a vintage pen worth is the same question as what is anything worth. It's worth what someone's willing to pay for it, whether they're willing to part with cash out of their pocket for some object that they desire. So it's based on how much cash they have and how much their desire is. All vintage pens are unique unless you're going to get something mint in box or new old stock, which is quite rare nowadays. So since each pen is unique, each pen has a unique value to it. So back in the early 90s, I sold a Parker Junior red Duofold, single band in excellent condition, and the price I got on eBay was $50, and I shipped it to Hong Kong. I'm certain it's worth a lot more money in Hong Kong because of its rarity in Hong Kong, but that's the bid that I got. And you can see big reds go for $100 on eBay. But if a pen is in good condition and being sold from a reputable seller that has a history of selling very good pens that people like and enjoy, then that will command a higher price. But again, at the end of the day, what is something worth? What someone's willing to pay for it. So this pen uncaps in about 3/4 of a turn, which is a little bit on the small side, but it still works well. So I like this size of the Duofold. It's bigger than the Junior and smaller than the large size Duofold, and I think that nib just looks out of perspective as being too big for the pen, but it's the nib that was on it. It feels great in the hand. We'll give you the section dimensions. I mean, the section is short, but it has a nice girth to it, and you can hold it anywhere. You don't really notice those threads. So that gives you a lot of flexibility to move around, which is what I enjoy when I write. The overall length uncapped is fine. We'll give you those dimensions. It does post relatively well and relatively deep, but it makes for a long pen. But the balance isn't bad, so for those of you that like to post, you could post this pen. I think most of us are not comfortable posting vintage unless we have to because it's so tiny you can't write without it. But I just wanted to show that to you. And the weight is also nice. It's not, I'd say it's on the light side. We'll give you those weights. But it, like I said, the main thing is it feels good in the hand. And as I've said before in other videos, feeling good in the hand is 90% of the joy of a pen. If it doesn't feel good in your hand, then it's not going to be an enjoyable writing experience, regardless of the nib, the ink, or the paper. But let's see how this nib writes. When I first put this nib to paper after inking it up with Pilot Blue Black, my ink testing ink of choice, this is just really smooth. It takes no effort to write, which I think is a great trademark of this nib. It's stiff, which is also a trademark. Apparently the first Duofolds, from what I've read, had manifold nibs because they had lifetime warranties and they didn't want people springing nibs. For the fine nib that it is, it's definitely a wet writer. Sorry for the Band-Aid, but I got to keep that on the finger. I'm very happy. This Restore had me concerned for a while, trying to get that section out and then working on the different bits. And that's the first kind of like lever filler that I've seen that has a metal ring in it. So that's the fun part of this, and I'm very happy to be able to return this to its original owner, and hopefully they'll also be very happy with the pen. So I hope you enjoyed this, another look at vintage and restoration of vintage. I've kind of burned myself out of restorations. It is a very emotionally draining experience for me. You know, taking all the time and the effort and using all of my experience and knowledge, which I don't consider to be very much, but hopefully sufficient to be able to restore something like this to working order and return it to its original owner. So thank you for watching. Hopefully you've enjoyed this little journey back into history with a very iconic pen that I think, you know, started the modern trend in vintage. You know, no more black boring pens, no more small pens. You know, Waterman and Schaefer also jumped on that bandwagon in the early 20s, and that continued to me into the late 40s. And to me, that's the golden age of vintage. There were some ups and downs during that period, but that's it. And then in the 50s, ballpoint started taking over. The fountain pen market started to shrink, and the designs of the manufacturers started to change, and some of them, to me, not in a good direction. Hopefully you're surviving. We seem to be getting near the end of quarantine here in the eastern part of the United States, in the state of New Jersey. I think it's going to be slow for people to get out and go back to what they used to do normally, and I think it may take a long time, and it may be until 2021 until things seem to be what people thought about as normal. But enjoy it. Enjoy whatever you can. Especially enjoy putting some ink on paper with your favorite pen, sharing your thoughts, just enjoying watching ink sit on paper and dry. I mean, I can get, you know, a lot of pleasure out of watching that. So we've reached the end of this video. Notice how that pen starts right up. This is just a great writer. Exceeds my expectations, and I had pretty high expectations before I inked it up. So we're going to say bye for now. Stay safe, stay healthy, stay happy. Nice writer.